The morning she found the papers, she was still in her robe, coffee in hand, standing at the kitchen counter she had picked out herself, in the house she had helped build, running a business she had started with nothing but a laptop and a dream she refused to let go of. And in one moment, one cold, ordinary Tuesday morning, all of it was gone. Not literally gone. Not yet. The house was still standing. The office downtown still had her name on the door. Her kids were upstairs asleep, breathing softly the way kids do when the world hasn't broken them yet. But the papers in her hand told a different story. A story that had been written behind her back, in secret, over months, maybe longer. A story where she was the villain who got nothing, and he was the hero who got everything. Her name was Mara, and she was supposed to be finished. He just forgot that she had copies of everything. They met in their late 20s, back when the world felt wide open and love felt like proof that everything was going to be okay. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, the kind that makes a room lean toward them, the kind that makes a woman feel chosen, feel seen, feel like all the striving and the scraping and the proving herself was somehow finally over. And Mara, who had grown up watching her mother work double shifts and still come home to do the dishes, who had learned early that nothing in this world was handed to you and everything you wanted had to be built with your own two hands, Mara felt something shift inside her the night they met. She let herself be seen. She let herself believe. Within 2 years, they were married. Within 3, they had their first child, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's laugh, a little girl who would grow up watching her mother fight, though she didn't know that yet. Within 5, they had a son. And somewhere in that stretch of diapers and late nights and early mornings and school drop-offs and packed lunches and pediatrician appointments and all the invisible labor that fills a life and never makes the highlight reel, Mara built something remarkable. She had an instinct for business that was almost impossible to teach, a kind of clear-eyed vision that cut through noise and spotted opportunity where others saw complexity, chaos, and risk. She started a consulting firm. Small at first, just her, a handful of clients, a rented desk in a shared office space on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like coffee and ambition. But she worked. God, she worked. She worked at 5 in the morning before the kids woke up. She worked at 11 at night after they went to sleep. She worked through a miscarriage that nobody outside the family knew about, and through a bout of pneumonia she didn't have time to properly recover from. She worked while he climbed his own career ladder, while she raised 2 children, while she held the household together with both hands and a grip that never loosened. The firm grew. Not overnight. Nothing real grows overnight, but steadily, organically, the way things grow when someone pours genuine care into them. Real staff, real office space, real clients who trusted her judgment and renewed their contracts year after year because she delivered. Real revenue that by the 7th year of operation was something she was genuinely proud of, something she had built from nothing on the strength of her mind and her labor and her refusal to accept that it couldn't be done. And because she loved him, because she had always believed that the best things in life were the things you built together, she made him a co-owner. She gave him equity. She brought him in on the financials, let him attend board meetings, gave him a title and a role that reflected his connection to something she had created. She opened the door and said, "Come inside, this is ours." That was her mistake. Not the love, not the generosity, the paperwork. Because he had been paying very close attention to the paperwork in a way she didn't know. The distance started gradually, the way most unravelings do. So slowly that if you had asked Mara at any single point to identify the moment things changed, she wouldn't have been able to. There was no dramatic fight, no single rupture. Just a dinner missed, then 2. A weekend trip that became a solo trip with a vague excuse she didn't press on. Conversations that used to feel intimate, that used to go past midnight the way they had when they were young and couldn't stop talking, now clipped and functional and over in minutes. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it was the pressures of 2 careers, 2 kids, a mortgage, the 10,000 invisible obligations of a life built for 2, but increasingly, she was starting to notice, carried by 1. She poured more into the business. She poured more into the children. She signed the permission slips and scheduled the dental appointments and showed up to the parent-teacher conferences with notes she typed the night before. She left less and less room for the dread that was beginning to pool at the edge of her awareness, quiet and dark and patient, waiting. She didn't know he had already consulted a divorce attorney 8 months earlier. She didn't know he had already started the transfer, and that every week she was working late and trusting him, another piece of what she'd built was sliding out of her reach. Over the course of those 8 months, he systematically moved assets with the precision of a man who had planned this carefully and believed he would not be caught. The business, which they co-owned, began to shift on paper. Quietly, document by document, filing by filing, through a series of amendments and corporate restructurings that were designed to look routine, the kind of administrative housekeeping that a busy co-owner might glance at and sign off on without reading closely. He knew she trusted him. He knew she was busy. He knew that the same qualities that made her excellent at building something, her focus, her forward momentum, her willingness to let her partner handle the administrative details, made her, in the right circumstances, vulnerable. He used every one of those qualities against her. He moved the business into a holding company he had formed under his name alone, using a filing made in a state where the disclosure requirements were minimal and the processing time was fast. He reclassified her ownership shares as non-voting, a change buried in an amendment she had signed while distracted, its implications obscured in language dense enough to require a specialized attorney to fully parse. He transferred their joint savings over the course of months, in amounts calibrated just below the thresholds that would trigger automatic alerts, into a personal account she didn't know existed, held at a bank they didn't share. He positioned himself, through a series of signed corporate resolutions, as the sole operational authority of the firm, meaning that when the divorce hit, her access to the company she had built could be severed with a single administrative action. He had a lawyer. He had a plan. He had 8 months of preparation behind him. And the plan was to hand Mara divorce papers on a morning she would never forget, watch her reel, and let the legal and financial structure he had built do the rest. She would have no business, no savings, no immediate legal footing, 2 children depending on her, and he, presumably, would have everything. He thought he had thought of everything. He thought she was just the woman who showed up and worked. He had absolutely no idea who she actually was. The morning she found those papers, something happened inside Mara that she would later struggle to describe. It wasn't just anger. It was something older and colder and more precise. She sat at the kitchen counter for a long time, very still, reading every word. Then she read them again. And then, quietly, she set down her coffee, walked to her home office, closed the door, and opened her filing cabinet. Mara had a habit, had always had it, even before she knew why. She kept copies of everything. Contracts, amendments, financial statements, emails, board meeting notes, bank correspondence, tax filings. She kept them in physical folders, organized and dated, and she kept digital backups on a cloud drive that only she had access to. Her husband had teased her about it more than once, called her obsessive, said she needed to learn to let go of things. She had laughed it off. She hadn't let go of anything. Now she sat in her office, pulling folders, cross-referencing dates, laying documents side by side across her desk. And the picture that emerged was breathtaking in its ugliness. She could see exactly what he had done. She could see the timeline. She could see the signatures. She could see the filings. She could see the moments where his plan had depended on her not looking, not knowing, not remembering. And she remembered everything. She called her sister first, just to hear a voice she trusted. She didn't cry. She told her sister what had happened in the flat, clear tone of someone who has already decided what comes next. Then she hung up. Then she called an attorney. Not just any attorney. She had done her homework in the hours after finding those papers, moving through grief and rage, and something harder on the other side of both. She found one of the most respected family law and business litigation attorneys in her state, a woman named Patricia Chun who had a reputation for being, in the words of one review, a scalpel in a room full of sledgehammers. Mara called. She got an appointment. She arrived with a box of documents so organized, so comprehensive, so precisely cross-referenced that Patricia Chun looked up from her desk after 20 minutes of reading and said, quietly, "He had no idea who he was dealing with, did he?" Mara said, "He's about to find out." The legal case was complex. He had structured his transfers carefully, used sophisticated instruments, worked with a lawyer who was good at making theft look like paperwork. But there were problems with his approach, problems Mara's records could prove. The transfers had occurred during the marriage, using marital funds, without her informed consent. Several of the filings contained discrepancies. One document bore her signature on a line she had never signed. Not a forgery, exactly, but an authorization she had given for an entirely different purpose, lifted and applied to something she had never agreed to. That was fraud. Not gray area fraud, the kind that carries real consequences. But before the law could work, Mara had to survive. He had timed the divorce filing to land at the worst possible moment, not by accident. She had no liquid cash. The savings were gone, moved to where she couldn't reach them without a court order. The business, on paper, was no longer under her operational control, which meant that the income it generated was flowing into accounts she had been administratively locked out of. She had 2 children who needed to go to school in the morning and eat dinner at night and be held when the world felt too big, which it was beginning to feel for them too, because children feel these things even when you don't tell them, especially when you don't tell them. She had a mortgage on the house. She had a legal battle ahead of her that her attorney estimated would take 18 months to 2 years and cost more than most people keep in savings. She moved through the first weeks the way survivors move, not gracefully, not with the dramatic strength of a movie character, but quietly and methodically, and one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, holding herself together through the discipline of routine, because routine was the only thing that didn't require her to feel what she wasn't ready to feel yet. She packed the lunches. She drove the carpool. She answered emails and showed up to meetings and smiled at the right moments and cried. When she finally let herself cry, only after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet and there was no one watching. Her sister took the kids for 2 weeks in the early stretch, so Mara could work without dividing herself. Her father, a retired contractor who had spent 40 years building things with his hands, who had watched his daughter build something with hers and understood exactly what kind of violence it was to have it taken, wired her money without being asked, a number that represented a significant portion of his retirement savings, and when she called him to object, he said, "Mara, you built that company. You build it again." And then he hung up. She didn't argue, because arguing would have required energy she needed for something else. She took on freelance consulting work under her own name, separate from the firm, pulling in former clients who had worked with her directly and trusted her instincts regardless of what letterhead the proposals came on. She worked from her kitchen table. She worked from the school parking lot on her laptop while she waited for pickup. She worked after 10 at night, after the kids went to bed, in the particular silence of a house that used to have more people in it and now had the right ones. She worked in the way that people work when anger and love are equally strong motivators, when every hour logged is both a survival act and a statement about what you refuse to accept. And every morning, before anyone else was awake, she spent exactly 1 hour on the case, reviewing documents, responding to her attorney's requests, making sure that every piece of evidence was in order, every date confirmed, every discrepancy flagged. She had built the case against him the way she had built the business, brick by brick, detail by detail, refusing to leave anything to chance. The custody fight was the part that nearly broke her. He had filed for primary custody of both children, painting a portrait in his legal filings of a mother who was erratic, financially unstable, and emotionally unavailable due to her obsession with work. He had screenshots of text messages, taken out of context. He had a declaration from a neighbor, someone Mara had thought of as a friend, describing a single argument she and her husband had in the driveway 2 summers ago. He had built a case designed to make her look like someone her children were better off without. If the asset theft had made her cold and calculating, the custody filing made her something fiercer. She had sat in the school pickup line for 6 years. She had stayed up through fevers and nightmares and first heartbreaks. She had learned the name of every child in her daughter's class, attended every school play, coached her son's soccer team through 3 seasons when no other parent would step up. She had been there. She had always been there. And she had the records to prove it, because Mara kept records of everything. She had calendars going back 4 years, detailed, time-stamped, showing who was at every doctor's appointment, every school event, every extracurricular activity. She had emails from teachers. She had notes from the pediatrician. She had photographs, dated and geotagged, at every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday. She had text messages from her kids' friends' parents, from coaches, from teachers, a documentation of her presence that was unimpeachable. And then there was the neighbor, the one who had provided the declaration about the driveway argument. What that neighbor didn't know, what Mara's attorney gently surfaced, was that the neighbor had recently entered into a business arrangement with Mara's soon-to-be ex-husband. A consulting arrangement, paid. The declaration suddenly looked a great deal less like honest testimony and a great deal more like something that had been purchased, and the opposing attorney knew it, and the judge noticed, and it was never referenced again. The trial, when it finally came, lasted 4 days. Mara sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal blazer, her documents organized in color-coded folders, her expression calm with the particular calm of a person who knows exactly what is in those folders and knows the other side does not. Her husband sat across the room with his attorney, a man in an expensive suit who had won a lot of cases by making people feel small. He had tried to make Mara feel small in every deposition, every pretrial motion, every legal maneuver. It had not worked. She had watched him try and she had taken notes. Patricia Chun was precise, methodical, and relentless. She walked the court through the timeline of the asset transfers with the patience of a teacher and the momentum of a freight train. She introduced the financial records. She introduced the discrepancies. She introduced the document bearing Mara's authorization repurposed for a use Mara had never agreed to. She called an expert witness, a forensic accountant who had spent 20 years finding exactly the kind of thing Mara's husband had done, and he laid it out in terms that were impossible to misunderstand. On the third day, the opposing attorney tried a maneuver that was either bold or desperate, depending on your read. He argued that Mara had been aware of the restructuring, that she had tacitly approved it, that her failure to object to certain filings constituted consent. Patricia Chun let him finish. Then she placed in front of the court a series of emails Mara had kept, organized and dated, in which she had asked her husband on multiple occasions to explain certain changes she had noticed in the company's paperwork. Emails he had dismissed. Emails he had deflected with vague reassurances. Emails that proved, clearly and with timestamps, that Mara had raised concerns and been deliberately misled. The opposing attorney sat back down. On the fourth day, the judge ruled. The business was returned to Mara's name as sole owner and operator. The fraudulent transfers were invalidated. The hidden accounts were ordered disclosed, and the marital funds within them were divided per state law, which meant Mara received her share, plus interest, plus a penalty assessment against her husband for concealment. He was ordered to pay a significant portion of her legal fees. His attorney, it later emerged, was quietly reported to the state bar for his role in facilitating the fraudulent filings. On the custody matter, because the court had separated the financial and custody proceedings at Mara's attorney's request, ensuring that one did not contaminate the other, the outcome was everything Mara had fought for. Primary physical custody was awarded to her. The judge noted in his written decision the extensive documentation of her consistent, attentive involvement in her children's lives. He noted the calendar records. He noted the teacher's correspondence. He noted, with particular weight, the discredited testimony of the neighbor, and made it clear that the court took a dim view of purchase declarations. Her husband was granted standard visitation. No more, no less. He had walked into that courtroom expecting to leave with everything. He left with nothing he hadn't earned through his own labor, and the debt of her legal fees, and the knowledge that the woman he had tried to erase had been keeping receipts the entire time. The business took 18 months to fully recover. There had been damage. Employees who had left during the uncertainty, clients who had pulled contracts while the ownership dispute played out, a reputation that had been deliberately muddied by whisper campaigns she knew had originated with him. She rebuilt it the way she had built it the first time, except this time she knew exactly what she was building and exactly who she was building it without. She hired back 2 of her best people. She brought in a client she had always been intimidated to pitch, and she pitched them, and she got them. She restructured the ownership so that it was airtight, so that no future partner, personal or professional, could ever replicate what had been done to her. She was harder now. People who knew her noticed. Not cruel. Mara had no interest in cruelty, but harder, the way something becomes hard when it has been tested by real pressure and held. She laughed at the same things. She loved her children with the same ferocity. But she walked through the world with a new kind of awareness, the awareness of someone who has seen exactly what is possible when trust is weaponized, and who has decided that the answer is not to stop trusting, but to never stop documenting. Her daughter, who was 12 by the time the trial concluded and old enough to understand that something significant had happened, asked her one night what it had felt like. Mara thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "Like I was standing in a burning building that I built with my own hands. And I had two choices. I could stand there and grieve the fire, or I could walk out and build something that doesn't burn." Her daughter looked at her for a moment and then said, "You walked out." Mara said, "I ran." There is a particular kind of violence in being underestimated by someone who was supposed to see you clearly. A particular kind of damage that comes from having your work stolen, not by a stranger, but by a person who watched you build it, who knew every late night and early morning that went into it, who understood precisely what it would cost you to lose it and chose to take it anyway. It is a betrayal that goes beyond the legal, beyond the financial, into something that touches the very foundation of how a person understands the world and their place in it. Mara had been through that. She had stood in the rubble of it. She had felt the ground shift and held herself upright by sheer force of will and the memory of what her hands were capable of. And she had walked forward, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she understood, in that cold and clarifying moment in her home office with her folders spread across the desk, that fear was not the point. Evidence was the point. Truth was the point. The patient, systematic, unimpeachable accumulation of truth was the only weapon she had ever needed. He had bet everything on her not having it. She had kept it all. There are women like Mara in every city, in every industry, in every quiet neighborhood where the lawns are neat and the truth is complicated. Women who are building something real and giving it everything and trusting the people closest to them to honor that trust. Some of them will never be betrayed. Some of them will. And for the ones who are, the ones standing at a kitchen counter on an ordinary Tuesday with a cup of coffee going cold in their hand and a story written against them without their knowledge, this is for you. Keep your records. Keep your copies. Keep the receipts, the emails, the calendars, the contracts. Not because you believe something terrible is coming. Keep them because your work is real, your presence is real, your contribution is real, and the truth of what you have built deserves to be documented in your own hand and kept somewhere safe. And if the day ever comes when someone tries to tell a story where you don't exist, where your name doesn't appear, where everything you made somehow belongs to someone else, you'll already have the evidence that says otherwise. The story isn't over until you say it's over. And Mara still has copies of everything.